Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Joey, this is all you, bud.
Sure thing. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We had a pretty successful early launch to this, and it seems like a lot of people are still coming back. So we do appreciate the continued support. Um, and as always, we hope that you and your family, your colleagues, and everybody are staying safe out there. And we're going to try to make this a little bit entertaining for you, just, to kind of, get a little humor into a pretty dry subject and a pretty solemn time as well. So if you look at the screen, we've got a little bit of housekeeping. We always like to just get out of the way before the questions start rushing in. So first of all, everyone is on mute. So don't worry about that. We won't be unmuting anyone. It's just too many participants. It gets a little bit crazy, you guys know. Please send any questions through the Q&A feature on the GoToWebinar platform. And I believe if you, there's a little bit of, Mike, if you want to advance the slides, I think you should be able to see.
On the one that says,
I can't see
if you.
What I'm seeing from your screen is still the first slide, so.
The title slide? Oh, that's
Yeah.
so disappointing. Well, I'm not on that slide, so that's a disappointment.
Well, that's all right.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, and if you're moving your cursor or anything, it seems to be frozen as well, so there might be an issue there.
Oh boy, what are we gonna do?
I can present and you can watch the screen if you want to try that.
Yeah, I think maybe so. Okay, so do I need to, you can take it back?
Yeah, give me just a second.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that, because I'm on the second slide like you asked, but it apparently is not working. Sorry for joining us. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty.
All right, so now can you see mine?
Let's see. Not really, but if you tell me what, let me see if you tell me what you're on.
Okay, so that's interesting. I think that might be on your end because we're getting
people can see yours.
Yeah, apparently they can. Ali, if you can give us a go ahead there as well. I know if you might still be on mute. I don't want to unmute.
Yeah,
it
seems like folks see your screen right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I see it now. So Joey, you're just gonna have to, I'm just gonna give you the signal or something when it's time to advance the mouse.
I mean, good thing we practice so much, so we should
Yeah, right. No worries.
So, all right, sorry about that, everyone. Well, if that's the worst thing that happens, I think we'll be doing okay. So, just a little bit of blip. So, technology is what the point of the slide is, basically. I hope that you can navigate the GoToWebinar a little bit better than we can. But here's a little bit of kind of a rundown on how to do that. You should be able to fiddle around with your audio settings. You should be able to download some handouts. We have 3 handouts actually for this presentation today. We have one that is basically a copy of these slides that you're looking at now. So you can download those now, or we will send them out later. You also have a copy of a white paper that Mike authored called Appropriate Ventilation Strategies. So that's a really good read if you want to learn more about the subject. And then there's also a file, an Excel spreadsheet that says ECSF vent calculator. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to calculate ventilation for 62.2, and that is one tool that you can use to do that. So as always, keep the feedback coming. We appreciate you all telling us how we're doing on the screen and the sound and everything so far. So it seems like most of you have found that Q&A feature. We will have some interaction a little bit later, so make sure that you do have access to that Q&A feature. And always, this webinar is for general audience. We have a lot of people here from the weatherization community, a lot of people from HERS raters, code officials and such. So do keep that in mind. We're going to talk about codes. We're going to talk about different standards. So some of them may apply to you, some of them may not, but it's all great information. So please kind of stay engaged for that part. All right, so without further ado, we've got some introductions here. So Mike, if you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself first, I guess.
Yeah, I'm the guy on the left, and that's a good picture. I've been with Southface for about pushing 25 years now, and come at the world from the mechanical engineering side of things, but I have a lot of construction experience and renovation experience, and I get to do a lot of our technical training, which I love doing, and I miss doing live training, Joey. I really do. It's hard to get the visual cues from people with the stay-at-home approach here.
Yeah.
And Joey, if you'll click it, I'm just gonna have to say the word click or something. I don't know.
Okay.
This is last week was Earth Day, so I thought I'd show a picture. It's my house. We've been trying to kind of green it up some, and then if Joey, if you'll click, I noticed you've been trying to green up yourself as well. So I really appreciate that effort. So I hope people.
I thought that was going to be a comment on my my weight gain during the quarantine. Yeah.
Maybe that'll come later. Anyway, welcome everybody, and thanks so much for your participation. Let's drive on. And next slide, I think most people have figured out about Southface, and again, we really want to be a great resource for you. So we'll drive on. And we've already done, this is our 5th webinar here. We've done the sort of the basics of heat, air, and moisture. We did a really kind of intense one last week with installation install, which I thought was a lot of content. And ventilation was just going to be too much to do in one session. So I'm really thankful to Joey that he was open to splitting it up into 2. And the next one that we'll be doing will be a week from today, and it'll focus on really kind of how to do it. So the methods or the techniques, and this one's all about indoor air quality and how you figure out how much you need, and a lot of good content. So thanks again for that. And join us for the future ones as well, we hope. Really quickly, we keep plugging some of the resources that we have on our website. The Georgia Energy Code stuff, in particular, this field guide's a great resources, but I've drawn a red arrow over here, and if you'll go to the Energy Code website for Georgia, and click it once, there's a appropriate ventilation strategies white paper that you can use. Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah, and that's also the file that's attached in the handout. So
yep,
you can get it there, you can get it here, whichever you prefer.
So that had a click. Okay, go ahead.
Alrighty.
And then I think in the interest of time, we'll just kind of say, if you're not listed here, then write us back in the Q&A feature. Just let us know if we missed you. But hopefully this is typically who we're seeing attend these, and it's quite possible you're not on this list. So let us know who you are.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some regular homeowners out there that are bored that are tuning in. So we like to be able to have a wide audience here. And just a quick note too about the ResNet CEUs. Most of you figured this out last time, but if you want to get that one ResNet CEU, make sure that you email courses at Southface, and we'll get you set up with there's a 15-question exam that you need to complete. So.
Yep. And again, building science is kind of the foundation here. This is the theme that all of these webinars are going to have in common. And I love it because now we're into the applied building science section, which is just really exciting to me. Keep going. Click, click, click. There you go. Are we going to do this as a poll, or are we just going to, figure out who's here? What's the plan?
Well, I think, based on historical data, Southface is based in Atlanta, so we do get a lot of the mixed humid and hot humid. But if you are, C, D, or E, let us know. I know we've had some people from Baltimore. We've had a lot of people from North Carolina, Virginia. Had a few Yankees up there. So if you guys don't fit in the A and the B, let us know. Just kind of give us an idea. We're getting some D's and a C, Minnesota. All right, welcome.
Fantastic, awesome.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be talking about this quite a bit as we go along. Ventilation, obviously, you know, doesn't necessarily consider climate zones, and maybe it should. Some
Yeah.
Ohios as well. So just to let you know.
Well, welcome all of y'all. And then again, the foundation is always good for a quick recap. Heat form energy going from hot to cold by one of three ways. Just drive on, Joey: conduction, convection, and radiation. And then if you'll just click through this, and we'll go on to the next one. Moisture is always from wet to dry, and it's going to move in a liquid form or a vapor form. And we'll drive on to the next one. And then click it again. And this one is probably worthy of a quick review. Joey, do you want to take this one and just kind of, you know, this one pertains directly to ventilation, so I think it's worth a quick review.
Yeah, not just ventilation. We talked a lot about moisture. So when you think about air movement, especially, you know, in those hot and humid areas, anytime you have that air movement in, it can be drawing in the moisture as well. And when we talk about ventilation, and especially next week when we talk about the ventilation strategies, that's going to have a lot to do with pressure. And a lot to do, you know, when we talk about fans, whether we use a negative ventilation strategy, which causes a negative pressure, a positive ventilation strategy that causes a positive pressure, or a balanced one that hopefully is somewhere in between. And then also always to keep in mind the three driving forces. Again, we'll talk quite a little bit more about this next week, especially the mechanical force of the fans.
Yeah, and again, I just, you know, as always, air goes from high pressure to low pressure. It's got to have a pathway. And particularly in terms of ventilation, the amount of air you push in has got to equal the amount of air that leaves, and vice versa. So, all right, let's drive on. I thought this was great, Joey. You should read this. This is, let's see if anybody can answer the question in the Q&A feature.
Yeah, so get prepared here, and I'm not gonna do this one justice. I apologize. I'm not gonna do a reenactment.
You're impressed. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I am certain that no air is so unwholesome as air in a closed room that has often been breathed and not changed. And maybe there should be a doth in here or two, just to give you kind of an idea of the timeline. I'll say it's not Lady Gaga.
That's right. Yeah.
It is. We've got a couple people. It's a founding father, so that should narrow it down to about 5 to 10 or so people. I'll say this is also might appear on some money, and hopefully you have some of this in your wallet. I do not. Okay, so I think we've got it now. A lot of people are chiming in now. Oh wow, a lot of people. Good job, everybody. So that's Ben Franklin. Of course, he's known for even in a time where we thought that cold weather caused colds and things, he was kind of an innovator, and he would take air baths, and he would just sit in his house without any clothes on, and just let the fresh air from an open window wash over him. So he was kind of a weird person at the time, but you know,
you and I are both proponents of that, aren't we? Isn't that how that works? Should we say that publicly? Not together, but I mean, I'm just curious. I think it's called the air wash strategy. Is that right? You just
air bath.
Open up a window, air bath. Yeah, that's a good thing. Anyway, driving on. Welcome again. If you're, we're very glad to have you. In part one of ventilation, we really want to tie ventilation into the context of the larger issue, which is good indoor air quality. And indoor air quality is really about understanding this hierarchy, if you'll click it, of controlling pollutants. And there is a hierarchy here. Source control is get rid of the pollutant, separate it, keep it from the people. And we're going to talk mostly today about the third thing on the list, which is to ventilate, to kind of flush out or dilute pollutants. And there's a fourth option with filtration. So we're going to look a little bit of that. We're going to kind of do a little bit of historical kind of perspective on ventilation. I think it's pretty fascinating as a topic. And then finally, definitely want to make sure you under, or at least are exposed to either the tables or the calculations, and see what some of the different approaches will yield for us. So welcome. And then at the very end, This is really more for what we're going to talk about next week, which is ways to actually bring in outside air. So we'll tease you with that. And again, we're always trying to take a systems approach. Ventilation is a big part of that. We're going to identify the people component of, click it if you would, the people aspect of the occupants and the impact. And again, very much ventilation as a topic ties into, why are we ventilating here? And ultimately, if you click it once, this in a hierarchy, we build homes today, we insulate them, and if you want to make insulation work, you have to have an air barrier. So right away, we've made a tighter house, and that tighter house yields all kinds of benefits: much better comfort, better performance, and a more high performance envelope. But because we've tightened it, now we got to provide fresh air. So that's the deal here. That's what we're up against. All right, if we'll drive on. A lot of times, probably, I bet a lot of people on here have run into this over their career of somebody saying, well, I want to build a house that's too tight, or that house is too tight or something. And I don't know, Joey, it's a little bit of semantics, but can you build a house too tight?
No, definitely not.
Okay, you're going to say definitely not. All right, I would say, if you'll click it, that you can build a house that is very, very tight and have a problem, but it won't be a problem if you provide fresh air. So it's a little semantics, but we would say you really can't have a house that's too tight as long as you provide ventilation. And so that ultimately is, I would say, our stance on the matter. So, all right. And then the other big thing is, I'm going to share my personal journey here on this, that, we bought our house, and I bet a lot of people on this call can have some experience with blower door testing. And we bought our house 20 years ago, and before we did anything at all, I did a blower door test because I kind of wanted to know where we're starting from. And the short version is 32 ACH 50. So that's 32 air changes per hour with the blower door operating. And most people on here would probably go, that's pretty bad. I'm not saying it's the leakiest home I've ever tested, but it's up there. And so here we have lots of air changes. And just for reference, today you'd be about a 3 ACH 50 if you went to the current codes today. So here's a house that's 10 times leakier than it needs to be. And by the standards of the time, it said, you don't need ventilation, you got lots of air changes. But the reality is the air quality in my house was not very good. And it was mostly because of air leaks coming from the attic and the crawl space in my particular case. So I think a lot of times people think of houses leaking and providing air changes, and they just think of a small crack of daylight under a door, but it's really leaks to other less desirable spaces that are the big issue. So anyway, we'll drive on. And I think the next one is, build tight, ventilate right. That's our kind of our mantra here. We want to also be clear that for this broadcast and the next one, that we're talking about ventilation as ventilation for people. This is in no means, if you'll click it, intended to be ventilation for attics or crawl space vents or garage ventilation. We want ventilation is intentional fresh air changes provided for people in the house, and it's different from infiltration, if you click it, which is random, and this is air moving and changing out in unknown amounts and unknown durations and random times and from unknown locations. And they both are air changing, but there's a very big difference in terms of health and performance. So that's a big thing. So I thought I'd share, if you'll click ahead, I thought I'd share a real example. This is my own house, and some of you, if you've been listening on some of the webinars, know that my daughter and I have been working up trying to install radiant barrier in the attic, and we encountered a little lesser traveled part of our attic that this is after I've messed with it. It just looked like the insulation was there, but it looked like it was wasn't quite right. And I went over and started messing with it, and it fell all in. This is after I scooped it all out. And it turns out our house, for whatever reason, it was a 10-foot ceiling in this place, and they dropped it to an 8-foot. So can you go back one? I'm sorry. They dropped it to an 8-foot, and you can actually see that is a 15-inch by 2-foot opening. And if you look down, you can see the floor framing, excuse me, the ceiling framing of the 8-foot ceiling below that. So that I all up with insulation, but obviously a giant hole in the air barrier. And so we scooped out as much as we could. You can click on now. Then I took some mastic and I gooped it around. Go ahead, click it. And you can see just kind of hitting it around. Mastic was a great way to do this. You know, I use it for a lot of things. I laid down a nice little goopy bead, one more, and I put the foam board on top of that. And the foam board I like to cut on a table saw. If you take a Sharpie and a straight edge, you can draw a really good line, and you can cut it on a inverted circular saw or a table saw. You can just get a beautiful factory edge, and it slides right in there. And you cover it with mastic, one more, and this is what it looks like. So it was, you know, if it were a floor, I would have used some mechanical fasteners to screw it in place, but it's pretty wedged in there. Once the mastic dries, it's not going anywhere. Put a bat on top of it, put some of the, one more, some of the loose insulation on top of it, and it's not a very pretty picture, but you know, now I just got rid of a 2-square-foot hole. I'm kind of embarrassed it was in my house. I just thought I'd show this. We are making progress. If you look kind of in the back, you can see my daughter. That's the corner where the little hole was, not so little hole. And we're just basically working on the right side. So we're nearly done. I can't wait to be finished with this project. A couple other kind of questions. Can't we just let the house breathe? And well, sure, except ventilation is breathing sort of with known amounts from known location, et cetera. It's very intentional, as opposed to infiltration, which just is everything it isn't. Are you breathing from places you don't want to breathe? Your garage, your crawl space, et cetera. And you know, as my old boss used to say, how big a nose do you want, and where are you going to put that nose? So I always thought that was a funny way to think about it. Can we open windows? Joey, I'm proud to report that you are still allowed to open windows. In fact, when the weather's nice, it's really a good idea to open windows. So we highly encourage you to open windows. Windows are holes that you can use when they work to your favor. But go ahead. The downside of window is there are security issues. There are issues with pollutants being pulled in without being filtered, like dust or pollen or humidity or mosquitoes. That's a pollutant. Noise is a big factor. I wonder if anybody is, go ahead.
The ironic one with the noise is that when I open my window, I have to hear my neighbor's air conditioner. So if he would just turn off his air conditioner, we could both be in peace.
I love that. I was thinking of gas-powered leaf blowers, which are the bane of my existence. Action is required. So this is a big one, that homeowners have to be willing to open and close windows. And I mean, you got to do this. I'm not talking about opening a window and then leaving it open all summer long with the air conditioner running or all winter long. I don't want you to heat and cool the ambient. But when the weather conditions are right, you have to be willing to do this. If you're willing to do this, great. Also, people need fresh air on a regular basis. This is a friend of mine, Joe Medosh, did a great presentation and started with a plastic bag on his head and established that, yes, we do need air changes. So we can't just say windows, we'll open them in the winter and open them in the spring and fall, because we need to breathe in the summer and the winter as well. So, so please use windows. Also, I want to give a shout out to, we've been doing some research with our friends from Lawrence Berkeley Labs, some Department of Energy, Building America research on ventilation that we're going to hopefully hear a little bit about on our next session. And one of the guys, Brett Singer, came up with this idea. I modified his concept, but he said, you know, here's some sort of key things to consider, is that people have the biggest impact on indoor air quality. So your lifestyle, you know, how sedentary you are, how active you are, what sort of pollutants you involve in your lifestyle has a big impact on indoor air quality. okay? In general, we want to keep our home dry, and keeping it dry is preventing us from growing mold. We also want to keep it from getting too dry, in the sense of that is a way to combat viruses. If you're worried about that, I'm going to always push you to use a room humidifier, especially if you're in a hot or a mixed humid climate. I just think that's a better approach. But more of our issue is that we get too much humidity. We want to try not to do things that are kind of stupid, that are really going to emit a large amount of contaminants in the home, and acknowledge, go ahead, that when we are doing things that are going to emit a lot, that's a good time to be running our fans, to have windows open, whatever, open doors. In other words, if you're doing something that's a hobby or whatever, it's going to put off a lot. If you got to do it in the house, be sure and ventilate while you're doing it. Go ahead. And let's by all means follow the code and do what we have been doing for a good while in terms of the code, which is local ventilation or spot ventilation, mainly kitchens and bathrooms. And you know, those obviously need to be ducted to the outside. Quiet means they'll get more run time, and so on and so forth. And by all means, let's don't do this. You know, there, unfortunately, with indoor air quality, it's not illegal to do stupid things. And stupid things to me are things like trying to burn a fuel of any sort inside your home and using the home's air for combustion, and then even worse, not having a flue pipe. And so there are products that you can buy that I think just absolutely common sense says this should never be allowed. So don't do this. And we'll talk more about that hopefully in a future one on combustion safety. Drive on. There are times when the outdoor conditions are right and we should open the doors, open the windows, and take advantage of that. I worked really hard to get a photo of my dog going. I made this screen door, sliding door attachment. It's very high tech, and the dog got a lot of treat. Tried to catch one going through the door. So anyway, take advantage of when the conditions are good. Open the doors, get free ventilation, shut the systems off when you're doing that. Okay. You know, I think we're huge proponents, I'm sure most people get this, of why we want to build a tight shell, why we want to have tight ductwork and prove it with testing. If the outdoors is particularly polluted, then the idea of closing that off is a really good thing. And that pollutants could be examples like a smog day, a high ozone level day, or a wildfire, or something else that we just, you know, there are times when the outdoor air, it's probably good to close it off. Go ahead. There are certain things we can test for, and we should test for. Radon's a good example. Go ahead. And in terms of technologies, variable speed equipment with that can adjust its you know, output, its runtime, is always going to work in our favor. It's going to be more efficient, but it's also going to have particularly with air conditioning, it's going to run longer and do a better job of dehumidifying. So that's a really important thing. So technology there, variable speed, inverter driven, whatever you want to call it, but something to adjust equipment from, you know, either being full on or full off, and that's all you get. And then lastly, very important, we want to use good filters. And good filters, we're going to come back to this, to me, is a thick pleated filter. And we don't want any air to leak around the filter. So we'll talk more about that as we go deeper. Pollutants, where do they come from? They come from indoors. They can be things like pet dander and dust mites and mold and allergens like that. Click it once. This guy had 18 wiener dogs. I was really impressed. We only need 16 more, Joey. So you know, I don't know if you're going to keep
well
up
underway.
Yeah, but I don't know about you and your cats. You're gonna have to try to come up with 17 more or something. So, so we have indoor sources of pollutants such as biological agents. Go ahead, click it. There's also chemicals that get pulled in. A lot of them are cleaning or pesticides, but there's also products that off-gas like formaldehydes from particle boards and medium density fiber boards, and then combustion. Combustion is one that, like I said, we really should take a hard stance on this. We can use combustion equipment, we just need to use it intelligently. And that's, you know, I think we've talked about how fireplaces, when they're a burning fireplace, that That's like a 300 CFM exhaust fan running. And we certainly, this was the middle photo of the water heater was a historic home that had been turned into a kind of a museum. And they had put two people's offices in the kitchen where the water heater was. We went in, we were doing an assessment of the building, and it was a combination of, I think, a small gas leak as well as a little bit of backdrafting issue, that the air quality in that room was just terrible. And that you can see it, that some people have louvered doors, but this one was right in the kitchen. So we corrected that. And then smoking and candles, of course, are putting their output right into the building. Outside air also can have pollutants. We have emissions from industrial processes, such as fossil fuel power plants, which emit all kinds of nasty things, including carbon dioxide, but nitrous oxide, sulfur oxides, mercury, very detrimental to our human health. Vehicle exhaust, and here's the lower picture shows ground level smog. That looks scary. But also you could even really consider humidity. You could kind of think of it as a pollutant. I mean, it doesn't hurt us directly, but it leads to bad things. So just kind of giving consideration to examples of pollutants. All right, driving on. Joey?
Yep. Trying.
I think in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of skip this one as a quiz. We've kind of covered it, but Joey, which of these factors is probably have the biggest impact on the indoor air quality in a home?
In a typical home, important to always make that distinction. And I'm gonna go with people. Again, with the typical modifier. There are some houses out there, that maybe combustion is the part that's making it bad. But interesting that you had the people smoking under the combustion portion and not the people portion, because we've definitely seen some houses like that where that's the worst horror stories I have from weatherization or from doing assessments is people smoking in a house for sure.
Absolutely. All right, let's drive on. So here's the hierarchy. Eliminate the pollutant. That means get rid of it if it's in the house, or don't bring it in. Separate it, keep it from the people. Ventilate, which we're going to spend a lot of time on, and filter. So pollutant needs a pathway to the people. And it's pushed by positive pressure. I just like the alliteration of that, but ultimately this is what we're trying to be aware of. If you'll click on, I thought I'd give some examples of source control. So these are just some examples of where we're making decisions either in the design or the operation that will affect the indoor air quality. One is removing your shoes at the front door. Some people do this. I don't seem to be able to win that battle in my household, but if a lot of dirt and stuff comes in on people's shoes, so if you can make your household operate like that, you're doing yourself a favor. Keep going. You can choose finishes and paint and adhesive and glues that will not off gas. And so that's certainly in your favor. Carpets, I put that on as just an example to remind me. And there's also a particularly hazardous bit of chemicals called the red list. And you really don't want those in your building materials, but they're in a lot of stuff. Again, sometimes you're going to have particle boards, but you can specify one that has a glue that doesn't off gas. It's the urea formaldehyde that particularly causes problems. Go ahead. Sometimes if you'll use a reclaim finish like this flooring, for example, that's pretty much, it's not going to off gas. It can be pre-finished, etc. Go ahead. Another example is you got a home with a gas space heater that's not vented. Let's get that out of there and put a vented one in. Hey, what a great idea. Go ahead. Upgrading a water heater that was in the kitchen using air around it. Let's use a direct vent. Let's relocate it, etc. Again, changing the and then of course not putting combustion products, or you be really minimal with your candles. And if you're big into candles, you definitely need to be aware that could be an issue. Driving on.
Real quick before we move on,
yes.
Can you talk about what the CRI green label is? Just the acronym.
I'm so sorry. I meant to mention that. Sorry. Carpet and Rug Institute. They have kind of it's sort of like the Energy Star version of, you can look at refrigerator and know it's more efficient if it's Energy Star, you can look at a Carpet and Rug Institute green label, and it will tell you, carpets that have some environmentally preferable attributes. So,
Gotcha.
Separation. Thank you, and sorry about that. Separation is the pollutant that's somehow still living, but just keeping it.
Hey, Mike, your audio is breaking up just
Getting
a
it to
little
the
bit here.
people. And if examples, yep. Oh, I'm so sorry. I want to take over for a bit. You can, that's fine.
Yeah, if you can, I guess maybe switch over. We can try that now.
If you can hear me, why don't you take over?
Yeah, it's still a little jumbled, so I'll go ahead and take this one. So, so the second step in the process, first we want to eliminate the source, and then if we absolutely cannot eliminate the source, then we want to make sure it's separated from the rest of the building. So in this case here, we're air sealing between the garage and the house. We want to make sure that anything that's happening out there, particularly CO, but also chemicals and things that we might store out there, are completely separated from the indoor house. And also looking at the door, the entry door from the garage, we see that a lot. Those should be exterior rated doors for fire prevention, and also they need to be sealed just like you would an exterior door. Running an exhaust fan in a garage that operates on an occupancy sensor could be an option there. You want to make sure that it's not pulling in, it's not creating a negative pressure and pulling in air from the rest of the house as well. Applying a water-based sealant on particle boards that could off gas, yeah, that would certainly prevent some of the off gassing on some of those products that potentially contain that urea formaldehyde. And then allowing new furnitures to acclimate in an outdoor space. So if you get a new couch, those things have a lot of chemicals that they were used. They spray stuff on them to make sure that that they don't get spills and things on them. All that stuff. Just like the physics that we've been talking about from moisture and for heat and for energy, it always is going to move from an area of a high concentration to a low concentration, and that includes chemicals, and that includes the off-gassing of these type of products. So sealing ductwork that's located in a vented crawl space or attic, those are, if there's a negative pressure on the ducts, they could potentially draw in pollutants from those areas. We have a whole webinar dedicated to ducted mechanical, so we'll definitely talk about duct sealing and such at a later date. And then always provide separate air to combustion appliances. So it's built into the code. Weatherization, we've been doing it for many years. If you have a combustion closet inside of a building, making sure that you're putting the high and low ventilation pipes, just so that you're creating fresh air for those appliances, and those appliances aren't stealing air from the occupants. All right, Mike.
Joey, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. So anything you wanted to add before we move on there?
No, that's beautiful. Let's just click on and try to get to some ventilation stuff. So again, I think we've covered this. Let's just click on through all these that we want to, ideally separate our combustion air from people air and make sure we use a flue. That's the short answer. Drive on. Filters, I did want to adjust that. Filters are important. Click through it because a 1-inch filter is really just a cheap filter is really there to protect the equipment. It is not going to help your human health very much. And even the better quality 1-inch filters I just can't get terribly excited about them. They are a little better, but they load up so quickly and they just affect airflow. It's to me, it's really much better to go to a thicker pleated filter if you'll click through. And those thicker pleated filters can really catch what's sometimes called PM 2.5, these particulate matter that are very small, that are really particularly bad for your lungs. If you'll click once more, I think it pops up with examples of kind of typical filters, what you would see with a MERV 6, and it's basically getting stuff you can see like cat hair. And we're able to do a little better with a MERV 8 and a MERV 11, but I did want to point out that MERV 13 can catch viruses, so that an argument for better filtration there. Driving on, a couple of things, of course, The thicker pleated filter, I think, is my big issue here. I really want that. I love in the upper right corner, you can see an example of a filter grill, and it's designed for a 1-inch filter. This guy came up with this really clever idea of he's able to put a 5-inch thick pleated filter that fits inside the wall cavity, but it basically fits in a 1-inch filter grill. So I thought that was pretty clever. And you know, this middle picture here showing a filter that cannot be changed because the water heater is right next to it. I see a problem with that.
Whoops.
And, yeah. And if you do pay money to upgrade to a better quality filter like the lower left, please make sure that that filter housing is properly sealed to the duct system, because I've seen, you know, people spend money for the upgrade and then the installation actually causes more duct leakage, and that's right there where the blower is. So that's pretty critical. Also, I like this. This is you can make your own. I've made these before. You just use some heavy duty plastic and some really good refrigerator magnets, but you can seal off the filter access, or you can buy one for like 10 bucks. That's a really nice approach. And when the system runs, it sucks it in and seals it up nice and tight. So that's our take on filters. And again, in the interest of time, I'm going to say the last line of defense against, you know, in that hierarchy, filtering is a great idea, but it's, you know, notice it's number 4 on the list. So I think we'll drive on if that's okay.
Yeah, and we'll include, you know, the UV filtration that seems to be all the rage these days. Again, that's kind of last line of defense there. Don't
Yeah,
try to take the first 3.
absolutely. So why are we ventilating? 2 main reasons: providing fresh air for people and to flush out pollutants. That's the 2 key purposes. Go ahead.
Pollution.
Yeah. Houses are, of course, tight, and click through these, getting tighter. Fresh air is important. We want good ventilation. We don't really know the right number, and we certainly don't all agree on how the best ways to do it. And I liked what you said earlier. I strongly think that a solution might work in one part of the country acceptably, but it doesn't mean it works everywhere. So particularly with exhaust only. So
unfortunately, there's no map for ventilation. They just kind of one size fits all, unfortunately.
And some of us on this call have been bugging them about using that map. By the way, ventilation's been around for a long time. I'm going to skip my stories of. I was involved in the 80s with some. I was in school, but I was involved in the early sick building syndrome studies, which was pretty fascinating. But you know, basically, the short thing that happened was, in the 70s, the energy crisis hit, and a good way to save money is to reduce the amount of outside air. And so it went from about 15 CFM per person to about 5 CFM per person. And all of a sudden, well, that's when we invented lawyers. That's what I like to say. So anyway, we fixed that now. We've pretty much bumped them back up to where they used to be. If you'll drive on, we can learn some from commercial buildings, though, about bringing in outside air from a good, clean source. And here's some pictures of where you don't do that, or it wasn't done on commercial buildings. You want to filter it, you want to dry it, ideally before you introduce it to the breathing space, which is, you know, where people are. You want to, in a commercial building, adjust the amount of ventilation based on what's happening in the building. If there's a ton of people in a space, we'll bring in more. If we're doing stuff that needs more ventilation, we can do more. And the best commercial systems are going to separate ventilation air from space conditioning. They use a dedicated outdoor air system. And of course, if they're going to recognize the opportunity with anytime you bring in a cubic foot of outside air, you have to condition it. And so we can do some energy recovery from a cubic foot of air that subsequently must leave the building. So those are good strategies, and we can apply them to residential as well. Driving on.
Mm-hmm.
Fans, we've covered this in other, you can kind of click through these. Most of these are exhaust fans that you might typically see if you want to click through these. They can range from pretty small to pretty significant. And they're all exhaust devices except for the last one, which is a recirculating fan, but that can cause pressure difference issues as well because of duct leakage and return path. One thing I was going to pitch is, on bath fans, I really like this switch that you see on the right. that is a preset timer. It's basically you turn it on, it's going to run, and I think it's 10, 20, 40, or 60 minutes. And that way you know you're going to get some, enough runtime. That has helped our household tremendously. That's from my bathroom. So also makeup air for kitchen hoods is a code requirement for anything over 400 CFM, or at least it should be. And there's some good details on how to do that as well. So there's some good YouTube videos on how to introduce outside air. I'm going to drive on if we could. This is a little bit frustrating because the 12 code basically said, the 2012 International Residential Code in the mechanical section said range hoods over 400 need to have makeup air, which is a good thing. If you click, the 2018 has the same provision, except if you'll click it, it says you don't have to do this if your house doesn't, as long as your house has, basically direct vent or, mechanically drafted power vented systems. But I want to emphasize this is not just a combustion issue. If you've got a tight house and you put a big hood, and to me, I've seen hoods, I've seen a 2000 CFM hood in somebody's house. And if that's a tight house and you don't provide makeup air, I mean, I don't know. That's more than a blower door. I know houses certainly that come in with blower door results that are much tighter than, or much lower CFMs than that number. So I really feel like that was a step backwards in the code.
Yeah, it's interesting. With all this that's happening, a lot of the cooking shows and cooking personalities have gone to YouTube, and they have these huge kitchens and these huge, kitchen hoods. And every time I see one, I'm like, oh my goodness, I wonder if they have makeup air. But I'm guessing probably not.
Yeah, well, it's funny, if it was a commercial building, they would have to, right?
Right.
But anyway, driving on, let's keep going. Couple observations here. Basically, again, not everybody agrees on these, and there's a combination effect of the codes. And also, one thing I really do like is that they used to be a different standard if you were a multifamily building 3 stories and under than if you were a multifamily 4 stories and up. But now 2016 basically says dwelling units regardless of the building size, which I like. So let's drive on. Oh yeah, and they still kind of have this mentality of air changes equals healthy, but yeah. It's also you have to appreciate the challenge too of people like ASHRAE trying to write a standard where, if 1% of the population is going to do stupid, stinky stuff, should we punish the other 99%? And that's the challenge. So I definitely appreciate that aspect of it. Driving on. They define what good indoor air quality is, and it's basically, it's not bad. And if you'll click it, indoor air that is not good is air that smells bad, contains irritating contaminants like pollen, or contains contaminants that I'm not aware of that are not good for my health, like carbon monoxide. And they say if you have any one of those 3, that defines unacceptable. So I thought that was useful. Go ahead. And in terms of the history, the original ASHRAE standard, or I say the original, but one from the 80s, which stuck around for a long time because of politics, basically said 1/3 of a natural air change, or about 1/3, or 15 CFM per person. And it was funny to me, it was based on odor, but not health. But actually it came in pretty close. And then the kitchens and baths, that 100 and that 50 CFM, those are still in effect today. What is new, if you'll click it, is in the 15 years later, they finally updated the standard, and it's a rule of, go back one, 7.5 CFM per person plus 1 for every 100 square feet of conditioned space. And then more currently, that one worked for the 04, the 07, and the 10. In the 13, the 16, and the 19, it's what you see here. And the only big difference is that they've upped it to 3 CFM per 100 square feet. And there's a very important adjustment that we're going to talk about if you use the more current standard. So we'll get into that in a sec. So let's just do a quick example on a small house. Here's a 1,300 square foot, 3-bedroom house. You calculate it both ways and click it. If you do it based on volume, you calculate the volume, you take 35% of that, and that's cubic feet per hour, divide it by 60, you get about 61 CFM. If you did it based on people, 3 bedrooms is 4 people, that's 60 CFM. So a pretty good agreement. But what if the house was big? 5,200 square foot, 10-foot ceilings, take 35% of its volume, and then you end up with 300 CFM, or based on better, you always pick the bigger of the two. So the big takeaway from this, click it, is that house size needs to be taken into consideration. And so in the future versions, which came out in the 2000s, go ahead, the formula is now 1% of the floor area and then 7.5 CFM per person. And again, people is estimated by bedrooms plus 1. So let's work an example. Here's that small house. It's 4 people. So the 4 people, 3 bedrooms, 4 people gives you 30, plus it's 1,300 square feet. So you're gonna get another 13. So by the formula, you would get 43 CFM. They also included a chart, and the chart rounds up a little bit. So you would get 45. So that's an example of a small house. Go ahead. A large house, using this approach, you would see the 6 people would give you 45 CFM, and then you'd have 100, every 100 square feet, you get another CFM, so it's 52. So that's 97 CFM, or the chart would be rounding up again to 105, so about 100 CFM. All right, what changed in the newer ASHRAE standard is the 3% of the floor area, and we'll talk about why that is, because basically under the old standard, the assumption was houses weren't going to be super tight. So the new standard is acknowledging that, and we're going to work the example now for the small house. So we still have the same 4 people, the same 30 CFM, but instead of 13, we have 13 times 3, we have 39 CFM. So we're calculating 69 CFM here, or if you use the chart, it would be 75 CFM, so significantly more on that example. All right, let's try the big house. The big house, 6 people, sure, but the square footage is a big contributor. It's 100. It's 52 times 3, essentially, is the 156 plus the people load. So that gives you 200. We're actually, if you click, we're actually off the chart because we're more than 5,000 square feet. But if you do the math, it's the same number. So it's about 201 CFM. So I thought I'd show those. Both ventilation standards, the 2010 and the 2016 and so on, they allow you to do an intermittent one where you can basically do, let's say, 50% of the runtime, but you just do double the amount. Or you can do 1/3 of the runtime, but for 3 times the amount. So the idea is that within a 4-hour segment, you're going to do the same amount of air changes as if you ran continuously at the nominal amount. And that for whatever reason, they changed it to 3 hours on the new system. All right, Joey, you take this one really quick. I think we got to keep going, so no poll here.
Yeah, I don't think we'll do the poll, but so according to 2016, how much CFM per person must be added to the calculation? And remember, that's 7.5. It kind of went backwards. The old standard was 15, but of course they didn't account for the area.
So very quickly, the code in 2012, and then no change through the next couple iterations. If you'll click it, basically it says if you're less than 5, you have to have a whole house mechanical ventilation system. Boom. At the same time, the energy code that came out said the majority of the country needs to be below 3 ACH 50. And even if you're in the Gulf Coast, you're still less than 5. So the upshot, and by the way, you also have to pass an air sealing insulation checklist and pass a blower door test. So the reality is everybody building to code today is supposed to have a tight house with fresh air. Click on.
As long as there are no state amendments.
Yeah, and we understand there have been some state amendments for sure. So here's the important thing. The code is based on the old ASHRAE, or the 2010 ASHRAE standard. And the original version only took the table, only took the chart. And more recently, they've given you the option of using the formula. So that is something significant, that if you go by code, you're based on the old ventilation standard. Drive on. You there?
Yeah, you should be seeing the next slide.
Okay, there it is. The other important thing I want to make is clear is that the code is based on just the design and not the actual, you do not have to verify it. So this is a very important distinction between ASHRAE 62 and the code. ASHRAE 62 basically says, prove it works. And the code says, yeah, I'm sure it'll run 100 CFM for your hood, or I'm sure your bath fan, regardless of how you run the duct.
Right.
You know, anyway, there's some good, actually, people just don't follow the code, but it is a big distinction here that one is requiring that you prove it. Keep going. And so I wanted to work an example. For whatever reason, it's a 1,400 square foot house. If you do it by the table, you would get 45 CFM. If you did it by the equation, it was 44. If you jump to the newer ASHRAE standard, it's the 3 CFM. You'll notice that it's now significantly higher. It's 60% higher. 72 CFM is 60% more ventilation air. So that's a big deal. So kind of remember those numbers, Joey. It was 45 and 72, okay?
Gotcha.
And if you'll click to the next slide, I want to point out there is the option of using a ventilation calculator to make an adjustment based on your blower door test. Click it once. This is in that magic equation that says Q total in the previous example would be 72 CFM. That's what the basic calculation told you. But if you do a blower door test and you're not super tight, and you can actually, in essence, get a credit, I'm using quotations here, my air quotes, for the fact that your house is not super tight. So if you look over here at the spreadsheet example, you'll see that we put in a number that gave us a 5 ACH 50, and that 5 ACH 50 resulted in an infiltration credit of 26.2 CFM, which was subtracted from the 72. So we ended up at about 45 again, which is kind of ironic. So that may have just been a fluke, but we ended up pretty close to the old code standard. So it's just a different way of approaching it. You can use our calculator if you want. Most people use this one, the red. I think you just Google, how'd you find it, Joey?
Redcalc.com, I believe it is, but yeah, I would just Google RED. That's Residential Energy Dynamics, RED.
Yes, yeah, and it will do the same thing. And then one more comment I want to make is that if there's also a provision here that if you have an existing home, so this is the weatherization folks, that has a bath fan and a kitchen hood, let's say, but they don't really measure up. They're able to do something, but they're not able to do enough. You would get what's called a deficit. You can upgrade your whole house ventilation to offset that deficit. So as an example, let's say your bath fan is only moving 30 and it's supposed to move 50. So you have a 20 CFM deficit, and your kitchen hood is only moving 80 and it's supposed to move 100. You have another 20 CFM deficit. Your total deficit is 40, and it says over here you take a fourth of that. So you could basically add 10 CFM to your house ventilation. And if you put in a house ventilation system of 70, you could essentially be in compliance. It's kind of weird. I don't think we want to go that route, but to kind of wrap us up, I guess, too, I want to make people aware of the adjustments that are baked into the code, or to the standards, rather. So just, this one's old. We're not going to use it anymore, but it is kind of interesting to see the old 1989 standard for the small house gave you either 60 or for the big house 300. When you jump to the code today, it would give you about 45 or about 100. And then when you jump to the newer standard, it would bump it to close to 69, 70 or 200. So it's kind of interesting to see the big house in particular went from 300 to 100 to 200. And of course, that's before you did a blower door test. You potentially get some credit to reduce those numbers with an asterisk. If you can drive on, this is my summary sheet. Ventilation is just a part of good indoor air quality. Keep that perspective always. ASHRAE 62 is the old classic formula, 7.5 per person, 1 per 100 square feet, and it's the same as the code. The newer standard is more because they're recognizing houses have gotten tighter, but you can do adjustments on the back end. And again, ASHRAE requires verifying the CFM. Did we make it to the finish line?
We're real close, and I think here we're just trying to make a pitch for next week. You know, I expected there to be more questions about what to do, but I think everyone figured it out. We are going to be focusing a lot more on the practical applications next week. So, and that'll start, of course, with exhaust, supply, and balanced. So tune in. That's what we in the webinar business call a teaser.
A teaser, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And so I also want to put this up too. And I don't know, do you have this as a poll, Joey, or not? But kind of asking people, our goal is that maybe by attending this webinar, we're like a annoying, nagging voice that says, will you do something, will you do something different as a result of doing this? And you can only check one. Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, I thought you could check all of them. So we need an all of the above option. But anyway, hopefully we'll spur you to some action, and at the very least, maybe we'll see you next week. With that, I want to ask, do we have any other questions? Looks like we've got some repeat offenders coming back next week, and who knows? Maybe we'll get some behavioral change out of this too. So, Joey, do we have any questions, things that we want to answer, or quiz questions or anything like that?
Well, let me just make sure, this is now a Thursday weekly webinar. So next week will be a continuation of this one, but there's 3 more that I think are really important that'll follow these up. So I wanted to point that out for sure. Again, the ResNet CEUs, if you have questions about that, just email courses@Southface, and we'll make sure to explain it to you. And then here are some other resources that we borrowed from here that we encourage you to kind of go out and do some research. And these are resources that we know and trust and have been using for many years. Be mindful of any resources that are popping up these days about indoor air quality and viruses and such. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And as far as questions, we didn't have so much on the content. There was one question early on. You were talking about ventilation specific areas, and I think you had bathrooms, utility rooms, etc. But you also had closed closets on there, and I'm wondering if you remember why specifically. I mean, just on a personal level, I always leave my closet door open, just to kind of ventilate it. But if you've ever encountered any,
I would say that's less common, but I have seen it. I think it might be maybe a larger walk-in closet that. I'll talk about this probably next week when we get into how to install ERVs, and people have different opinions on where you for an energy recovery ventilator, where should you pull air from? And a guy that I have known for a long time, who's just an absolute guru in this field, is Terry Brennan, and he and I were talking about this one time, and he says, I like to pull. I see your screen. He was like, I like to pull fresh air from. Oh, that's fine. He said, I like to pull fresh air from, you can give it to me if you want, from closets where people keep their shoes. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And actually I ended up doing that in my own ERV installation. One of the places I pull air from is a closet, and there is enough of a door undercut. So it does, it's not a completely sealed off closet. It actually has a decent undercut.
Right.
And I might even take a picture of what I did to keep people from piling stuff on top of it. But anyway, the intake, because it's actually in the floor. But it turns out that, that's, why not, I guess, would be a comment. And I guess some people have put some exhaust fans in there. I'm not sure. Maybe if you did, and if you had like an ironing station or, something, I don't know. You might want that. But that's a good question.
That just made me think of, not only where you're pulling the air from on the inside, but where you're pulling air from on the outside as well. We kind of went through this one pretty quick, but I love this picture on the right of I believe you said it was a school. Not only are they're drawing in their, and I'm going to use the air quotes here, fresh air from right around their garbage cans, but I think you said too that this was like where the drama club did all their spray painting for their props. So You
Yeah,
can
and
kind
it's
of
also
see that.
yeah, it's also the loading zone, the unloading
Yeah.
zone. So, you
So
know,
there'll be
you back a truck here,
so a
and what you,
triple whammy. I couldn't
yeah, well, actually,
couldn't
there's
have
one
parked them.
more even, which you can't see,
Uh-oh.
is right out of the frame is there's a cooling tower. So, you know,
Some moisture and everything. Yeah.
I don't think
So
you want to be breathing cooling tower air. That's particularly hazardous. So, yeah, it's you know, and the middle picture I thought was really more of a thermal pollutant issue.
right.
These are heat pumps, and it just means they're exhausting, you know, very hot air in the summertime that then gets sucked into the building. I guess that's a form of reheat, but not a good form.
Yeah. And
And
of
in the
course,
wintertime, it's very cold air. So, yeah.
yeah, and we see
Go ahead.
too
Sorry.
a lot of times. Oh, well, what happened there?
I don't
We
know. That
see
was
too
weird.
sometimes not only and this isn't necessarily a ventilation thing, but you know, the people exhaust their dryers right there by their um,
Yep,
air
yep,
conditioning.
yep,
Well,
yep. So it does require some thought, and definitely, my wife is an architect. She had a project where, for whatever reason, the contractor put the plumbing stack right next to the fresh air intake. So, you know, that was obviously not healthy, or not didn't smell too good. So,
right.
I'm seeing your screen, but
Yeah, that's okay. I don't think I have any top secret information there, but I wanted to talk though. I think we had definitely some manufacturers reps on the call too, and we had definitely some comments about pleats and things.
okay.
One would be when we talk about a big pleated filter. Maybe this isn't the best slide for that, but maybe that thick. I think you said like a 5-inch media filter.
Yeah.
Something like this. Can you kind of explain like how the pleat works and surface area and how that?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was in the interest of time. We were just blitzing through that. But the reason why I like a thick pleated filter is because if you were to open up a thick pleated filter, you could walk across the room with it. It has so much surface area in it. And that all that surface area means that air can flow across it. Uh, uh, and it's got a lot of surface to catch particulates, but also the high essentially surface area of the pleat means you have a very hopefully manageable pressure drop across it.
And yeah, exactly.
And
That's exactly where the commenter was going as well. And you know, with all these things, you know, just make sure that you're, of course, abiding by manufacturer's recommendations and such. But with those big pleated filters, there's really very little static pressure drop in those.
well, I mean, the key is you just have to design it for it, and that's the key thing is and maybe we can get into this in more detail in another webinar. But yes, you have to. Uh, I even know some installations where they wanted really, really good filtration, and they basically said, okay, we're going to split they had essentially a giant return coming back to the air handler, and they just split the return into to basically run across two different filters in parallel, so
Hmm.
that, you know, instead of trying to move, let's say 1600 CFM through one duct across one filter, they split it, and 800 went across each individual filter, and therefore, you know, you got a much more acceptable pressure drop. So yes, that is important, and I didn't mean to skip by that too much. Filtration, you know, could almost be its own webinar, and I'm not saying by any means that filtration is a bad thing, but again, just keep the perspective on you know, let's just not run to filters as the immediate fix for everything. They play a role in achieving good indoor air quality. Oh, there you go. I like that. That's a good one. Can we leave that up? That's a good one.
Yeah, I was gonna say the questions have kind of tapered off here. We still have a few stalwarts that are hanging around, but thanks again for joining us. We just wanted to leave you on this note, and then of course invite you to come next week where we kind of continue this conversation on ventilation and indoor air quality. So, Mike, if you have anything else.
No, I just gonna go take my air bath in just a minute. So yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
thanks again to everybody. Really appreciate it, and stay safe.